I caught my fiancé with my sister, and her excuse was, I was feeling lonely. By the time I made it up the stairs to my sister's apartment, my skin felt too hot for my own body, and my vision kept doing this weird tunnel thing, like the hallway was stretching away from me no matter how many steps I took. I honestly thought it was just the stupid flu I had been fighting all week, that if I could just lie down on her couch for an hour and drink something with electrolytes, I would be fine. That was the whole plan in my head. Key in the lock, quick text saying, hey, I am here, I feel like death, blanket over my shoulders, nap. I was tired, I was sweaty, and I was absolutely not ready for the way my life was about to snap in half in the amount of time queuing up a video on my phone usually takes. The first sign that something was off should have been the silence. My sister never has silence in her place. She treats background noise like oxygen. Normally there is some show playing, or music, or one of those endless videos from a social media app where people rearrange their pantries while a robot voice reads text. That afternoon, there was just this thick, almost sticky quiet behind the door. I remember pausing with my key halfway in, thinking maybe she had gone out, but her car was downstairs in its usual crooked spot, and my fever brain decided the most reasonable conclusion was that she was just napping. The door was not even locked properly. It gave way with that soft click that means someone closed it in a hurry. Not all the way. And the smell hit me first. Perfume, sweat, and something else I do not really want to name, but my body recognized instantly. My stomach flipped before my mind caught up. I stepped into the living room, and there they were, like some terrible cliche someone would write and then delete for being too on the nose. My sister was in my fiancé's lap on the sofa, both of them half-dressed. Her hair a complete mess, his shirt open, their faces so close that for a second I thought they were just talking. Then she laughed. This breathy little sound I had never heard from her before, and he kissed her neck right where he used to kiss mine. People always say time slows down in moments like that, but for me, it just shattered. 1 second I was holding my keys and my tote bag. The next I was standing there empty-handed, my fingers numb, my ears roaring like I had been pushed underwater. My sister's head turned first. I watched her eyes travel from my shoes up to my face, watched the exact second she realized who was standing in the doorway. She froze, then did this thing she always does when she is caught doing something awful. She tilted her head, blinked slowly, and tried to look confused, like maybe the real problem here was some misunderstanding I had created in my own brain. He reacted slower. My fiancé, well, my ex now, obviously, turned his head with this lazy half-smile that died so fast on his face it was almost satisfying. The color drained from his skin. He said my name once, like that was supposed to fix something. I could feel sweat sliding down my spine, and I could not tell anymore if it was from the fever or the betrayal or both tangled together. My knees did that weak thing you see in old movies. And for a second, I honestly thought I was going to throw up on her rug. I wish I could tell you I said something powerful, that I delivered this cutting line and walked out like a character in a movie, hair flowing, dignity intact. What actually came out of my mouth was more like a strangled sound and something along the lines of, "Are you serious right now?" Which, considering they were literally half naked on her couch, was probably the dumbest question of all time. My sister reached for a blanket to cover herself and him at the same time. Like I was the intruder. Like I was the one who needed to be shielded from indecency in her home. The room tilted. My heart was racing in that uneven way that makes you aware of every beat. The air felt too thin. I backed away without even remembering how my feet moved. Someone said my name again, maybe both of them, but it came through muffled, like I was hearing it from inside a car with the windows up. I bumped into the door frame, found the hallway again, and somehow got the door closed between us. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped my keys twice before I managed to shove them into my bag. The parking lot was a blur of concrete and faded lines, and the same cars that had been there when I walked in, except now everything looked slightly wrong, like someone had nudged reality to the left when I was not paying attention. I reached my car and leaned against the driver's side door, trying to breathe while my chest did that tight, fluttery thing that makes you feel like there is a belt around your ribs. I knew I should not drive. I could barely see straight. Fever plus shock is not exactly the combination they recommend for operating a vehicle. I slid into the passenger seat instead, hands still shaking, and grabbed my phone. It took me 3 tries to unlock the screen. I do not even remember scrolling through my contacts. My thumb just found the one person who lived close enough and cared enough to come get me without asking 1,000 questions first. When my friend picked up, I did not even say hello. I just started crying, ugly, loud, messy crying, and somehow managed to choke out, "Can you please come get me? I am at my sister's place. I cannot drive. Please." She did not ask why. She just said, Stay in the car. Lock the doors. I am on my way. In that calm voice that made me want to sob harder. While I waited, my phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from my sister, from my fiancé, then messages. First it was, "We need to talk. And please do not leave like this." Then it shifted into, "This is not what you think, and you are overreacting." Which, by the way, is not something you should ever say to someone you just cheated on with their own sibling. I turned the screen face down on my lap and stared at the dashboard instead. The text that actually made me laugh, in that hysterical way you laugh when your brain is running out of options, came about 10 minutes into the silence. It was from my sister, and it said, "You know he reminds me of that guy I told you about, right? The one I never got over. My therapist says I have unresolved attachment issues. This is not about you." I wiped my eyes, read it again, and felt something cold settle in the middle of all the heat and shaking. Of course she had a story ready. Of course she had a way to make this about her trauma and her healing, instead of the fact that she was sitting half-naked on my fiancé's lap in the middle of a weekday. My friend's car pulled up in front of mine exactly 20 minutes after I called, headlights cutting through the late afternoon haze. She did not bother parking properly. She just got out, walked straight to my door, and opened it before I could pretend I was okay. One look at my face and her shoulders dropped. "Oh," she said softly. "It is that bad." I nodded. My throat hurt too much to answer. She helped me stand, guided me into her car, and buckled my seatbelt like I was a child. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from my sister appeared on the screen. A paragraph this time, already trying to rewrite the scene into something complicated and tragic, where she had no real agency, just triggers and old wounds. My hand clenched around the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "I am blocking her for now," my friend said, taking the phone gently from my grip. "You are burning up. We are going to my place. You are going to drink water, take something for the fever, and then, if you want, you can tell me everything. Or we can just watch mindless television until you fall asleep. Your choice." I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes as the car pulled away from the parking lot. Somewhere behind us, in that apartment filled with lies and overpriced throw pillows, my sister and my ex were probably already building their version of what had just happened. They were going to need a good story. The thing they did not know yet, what I did not fully know yet either, was that this time I was not going to disappear quietly and let them decide what everyone believed. For a couple of days, though, I did disappear. Fever will do that to you. My body basically staged a walkout. I spent most of that week on my friend's couch, drifting in and out of sleep while she checked my temperature, forced me to drink soup, and brushed my hair back from my face when the nightmares made me jerk awake. Every time my phone lit up, my stomach clenched. Calls from my parents, dozens of messages from my ex, whole essays from my sister about how love is complicated, and this is bigger than labels like right and wrong. I muted everything and let the silence wrap around me instead. You have to understand something about my sister for the rest of this to make any sense. This was not the first time she had blown up someone's relationship and then tried to frame it as some deep, uncontrollable emotional thing that happened to her, not something she did. When we were younger, it was smaller things. She would flirt with someone who was clearly into me, then tell me later that she could not help it, that there was just a connection there she did not feel with other people. At the time, I thought it was immaturity or insecurity. I did not have the language yet for pattern or entitlement. By the time we were out of school, that pattern had bodies attached to it. A friend from college who called me sobbing because she had walked into a party back home and found my sister pressed up against her boyfriend in the kitchen. A cousin who stopped talking to me entirely after my sister framed a similar situation as, "It just happened, we did not mean to, the chemistry was insane. There was always a twist. Some dramatic backstory that made her sound like the main character in a tragic romance, instead of the person who crossed every line available." My parents never really held her accountable. If anything, they wrapped her in more bubble wrap every time she messed up. My mother would whisper about how sensitive my sister was, how she carried the weight of the world, how she needed support, not judgment. Support usually meant spa weekends paid by them, new clothes, a little self-care retreat so she could process. My father pretended not to see most of it. When things blew up, he would pat my shoulder and say something vague like, "You know how your sister is," as if that explained why other people's hearts were acceptable collateral damage. Meanwhile, I was the one who had moved out early, paid my own rent, juggled 2 jobs, and never once had my mother offer to pay for a massage because life was too heavy for me. When my last serious relationship before my fiancé ended, all I got was, "Well, Maybe now you will focus more on your career, and a comment about how at least I did not have children involved. The double standard was not subtle. It was neon. Lying on that couch, sweating through my t-shirt and replaying the scene on the sofa on an endless loop, something started to click that made me feel both sick and weirdly steady. This was never going to stop on its own. If I did what I had always done, cry, move out of the way, try to be the bigger person, my sister would just add this to her list of tragic love stories and move on to the next person whose life she could rearrange without consequence. I did not want to be noble. I wanted something to actually change. On the third day, when my fever finally broke enough for my brain to string thoughts together in a straight line, I picked up my phone and scrolled back through years of messages. I went through conversations with that friend who had caught my sister with her boyfriend, through the angry texts from our cousin before she blocked me, through my sister's long monologues about a mysterious man she met years ago who ruined her and set the bar so high no one else ever compared. He had a nickname in her stories, obviously something dramatic she used so she could talk about him without saying his real name in front of our parents. But in one older message, when she was ranting to me at 3 a.m, she had slipped and typed his actual first name once before autocorrect caught it. I stared at that single word on the blue screen, feeling something cold and focused slide into place under my ribs. According to her, this man was the great love of her life, the one that got away, the reason she kept blowing up any relationship that reminded her the tiniest bit of him. He always had the same job in her story. The city changed sometimes, the timeline shifted, but certain details never did. He was a physical therapist. They had met when she hurt her shoulder at a gym. He had this calm voice and sad eyes. He had broken her heart so badly that every man with even a passing resemblance became a walking trigger. Except now I was looking at messages that told a completely different version. Dates that did not line up, comments from friends that suggested she had actually broken up with him for reasons that had nothing to do with heartache and everything to do with money and status. And if there was one thing my sister excelled at, it was using half-truths as shields. I could have just closed the chat and gone back to trying to breathe. Instead, with that shaky, adrenaline-fueled determination that usually leads to bad haircuts and long texts, I opened a search bar and typed his name, along with the city she had mentioned most often in the story. It took about 5 minutes to find him. There he was, smiling in a profile picture for a clinic, his job title written underneath. Same first name, same profession, same general look. My sister used to swoon over when she was recounting the story of how he had ruined her for other men. For a while, I just stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the message button, heart pounding. This was insane. Normal people did not do this. Normal people did not reach out to strangers from their sister's past and say, "Hey, quick question. Are you the emotional catastrophe she has been blaming for every terrible decision for the last decade?" I almost put the phone down. Then, I thought about my sister's text from that afternoon, about how this was not about me, and something in me snapped a little more. I typed, erased, typed again. Eventually, I settled on something that did not sound like I had escaped from a hospital. I told him my name and that I was pretty sure he had dated my sister years ago. I said I knew this was weird and he could ignore it, but that my sister had been using their story as a justification for hurting people, including me, and that I was trying to understand what was real and what was not. I hit send and immediately wanted to crawl out of my own skin. He did not reply that day, or the next. I told myself that was good, that this was a sign from the universe that I should mind my own business. I tried to focus on the much more urgent problem of unengaging from my ex, from wedding deposits, from the shared lease we were supposed to sign next month. My parents blew up my phone with messages ranging from, "We need to talk about this like adults," to, "Your sister is devastated. You cannot just abandon her when she is clearly in pain." Not once did anyone ask if I was okay. On the fourth night, when my fever finally went down enough that I could stand under a shower without feeling like I would pass out, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. I dried my hands on a towel, opened it, and there it was. He had replied. He said my message had taken him by surprise and that he had read it 3 times before answering. He confirmed he had dated my sister briefly, that they had gone out maybe 3 times, and that it had been years. He said he was not sure how much I wanted to know, but that he had his own version of that story, and it did not look anything like the tragic epic I had hinted at. He suggested we meet in person if I was comfortable, somewhere public, so he could explain properly. My first instinct was to bail. I could already hear my mother's voice, horrified if she ever found out. "You contacted one of your sister's exes? That is so messy." But then again, So was watching my sister shove my fiancé's hand under her shirt while pretending she was haunted by an old flame. I agreed to meet. We picked a coffee shop halfway between our cities, a neutral ground where I could, in theory, get up and leave without making a scene if he turned out to be nothing like whatever I was imagining. On the day of the meeting, I felt a different kind of sick, the kind that starts in your stomach and makes your palms sweat. My friend offered to come sit at a table across the room in case I needed backup, but I said no. This part I needed to do myself. I put on jeans that actually fit, a faded sweater, and makeup that tried very hard to make me look less like someone whose world had imploded a week ago. In the mirror, my face still looked puffy from crying, but at least my eyes were not red anymore. He was already there when I walked in, sitting at a corner table with a mug in front of him and his phone in his hand. He looked up when the door opened, and I knew immediately it was him, even though I had only seen that one professional picture. There is something about seeing a person who has lived rent-free in your sister's stories for years. You recognize the shape of them even if you have never stood close enough to notice the little lines around their eyes. "You must be Tessa," he said, standing up as I approached. His voice was lower than I expected, calm. He smiled in this cautious way, like he was not sure yet if we were about to have an argument or a normal conversation. "I am guessing this is as weird for you as it is for me." "You have no idea," I said, letting out a breathy laugh. My hands were shaking again, but this time for a different reason. We sat down. I wrapped both hands around my mug mostly so I would have something to do with them. For a second, we just looked at each other. Two strangers connected by a hurricane neither of us had created on purpose. "Okay," he said finally. "Where do you want me to start? Because I only dated your sister for about a month, but apparently that month has turned into a legend." I told him, in broad strokes, what my sister had been saying for years. How she described meeting him, how she said he had awakened some epic love in her, how she swore no one else had ever measured up, how she justified tanking other people's relationships because she was still broken from what happened between them. Saying it out loud like that made it sound even more ridiculous than it had in my head. He listened without interrupting, jaw tightening slightly at some parts, eyes widening at others. When I finished, he took a long sip of his drink and set the mug down carefully. "I am not going to tell you your sister is lying about everything," he said. "Feelings are messy. People remember things differently. But here is my version. They had met at a clinic, not a gym. She came in with a minor injury, they flirted. He broke a professional rule and asked her out after her last appointment. He did have that calm voice and probably the sad eyes. His mother had died a few months earlier and he had been walking around feeling like someone had taken the floor away. They went out 3 times. It was fun. It was not epic. On the 3rd date, he told her he was between jobs, that he had just left a position he hated and was about to start somewhere with a lower salary but better hours. She had gone quiet, her face closing off in a way he did not fully understand at the time. 2 days later, she blocked me on everything, he said, shrugging one shoulder. Phone, messages, all of it. No explanation, just gone. I figured I had misread the situation. Maybe she realized she was not that into me. It sucked, but honestly, I had bigger things to deal with. I did not know she had turned that little blip into some tragic origin story. He pulled out his phone and after a second slid it across the table toward me. On the screen was a screenshot of the last text he had sent her back then. A simple, "Hope you are okay. Let me know if you still want to go to that concert." Followed by the little system message saying it had not gone through. No drama, no betrayal, just someone who got cut off and moved on. "I heard about the rest later," he continued. "We have some mutual acquaintances." I started hearing my name in conversations where I was this villain who had used her, ghosted her, broken her heart. It was honestly disturbing. At one point, it started affecting me professionally because she was telling people in that circle that I preyed on clients. I had to talk to my supervisor about it to make sure my job was safe. I felt my nails dig into the cardboard sleeve around my mug. Rage and shame tangled together in my chest. "She never told me any of that," I said quietly. "She just talked about how deeply she loved you and how you destroyed her. Anytime she did something messed up, like flirting with someone else's boyfriend, she would bring you up as the reason she could not control herself." He nodded slowly. "I figured something like that was happening when one of the women she hurt found me online and reached out," he said. "She wanted to know if I had really done those things to your sister." When I told her my version, she just started laughing and then crying at the same time. That was when I realized this was not just about me. This was a pattern. I told him about the friend from college, about my cousin, about the way my parents always cushioned my sister's landing every time she jumped and landed on someone's head. I told him about walking in on the couch scene, about the text she sent me afterward saying this was not about me, it was about him, the ghost she never got over. Saying it to someone who had actually been that ghost made the whole excuse feel even more pathetic. "So she is still using me," he said, rubbing a hand over his face. "That is great." We sat there for a moment, letting the awfulness of it settle between us. I felt weirdly protective of him, this man I had just met, because I knew exactly how it felt to be turned into a prop in my sister's little mythology. For years in my family, I had been the responsible one, the one who made good choices, the one who could handle being disappointed because I was strong. That sounds like a compliment until you realize it is an excuse for people to treat you like you do not need basic consideration. "I am sorry she did that to you," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "And I am sorry you are still dealing with the fallout. I reached out because I am tired of everyone treating her behavior like the weather. Like it just happens and we all have to carry umbrellas." He smiled at that, an actual warm smile this time that reached his eyes. "That is a good line," he said. "The umbrella thing, you should write that down." "I am more of a ranting in my notes app type of person," I admitted. "But thanks." We talked for hours, about my family, about his life, about grief and guilt and the weird roles we both had played in other people's stories without realizing it. He told me about losing his mother, about the way that had made him grab onto any attention or comfort he could get for a while, sometimes in ways he was not proud of. I told him about growing up with a sister who could cry on command, and parents who acted like tears were a get-out-of-jail-free card. At some point, the conversation shifted from what my sister had done to what I wanted to do now. That part was more complicated. On one hand, I wanted her to feel something, anything, that looked like an actual consequence. On the other hand, I did not want to turn into some revenge-obsessed cartoon version of myself. I did not want my whole personality to become woman whose sister stole her fiancé. "What do you actually want?" he asked finally, leaning his elbows on the table. "Not what you think you are supposed to want. Not what your parents want. Not what she wants. You." I sat there staring at the little swirl of foam in my mug and realized no one had asked me that in a very long time. What I wanted was for my sister to stop treating other people's lives like a buffet where she could just grab whatever looked good. I wanted my parents to see me, really see me, not just as the sturdy background daughter who would always figure things out on her own. I wanted my ex to feel at least a fraction of the humiliation and heartbreak he had just handed me, like it was nothing. "I want her to stop getting away with it," I said slowly. "I want everyone to stop rolling out the red carpet every time she cries about how hard her feelings are. And yeah, I guess I want people to know the truth. I am tired of being the only one holding it in, so nobody has to feel uncomfortable at dinner." He nodded. "Truth is a good start," he said. "But you know she is going to spin it. That is what she does. She will cry. She will talk about her trauma. She will find some therapist quote to justify it. Your parents will want peace at any cost. You said it yourself. They treat her like the weather." "Yeah," I said, a bitter laugh slipping out. "Which makes me what? The person who forgot an umbrella and deserves to get soaked?" "You could be the person who finally checks the forecast and decides to move," he said. "Or at least the person who stops standing outside on purpose." We both fell quiet at that. It hit closer than I wanted to admit. I had built my life in the same city as my family, partly because it was easier, and partly because some part of me was still waiting for my parents to wake up one day and realize I had been there the whole time, trying not to make waves. Maybe that had been my own version of magical thinking. By the time we left the coffee shop, the sky was turning orange outside, and my head felt strange, like someone had rearranged furniture in there. We exchanged numbers before going our separate ways. It was practical at first, just in case my sister tried to twist what had happened into something else and I needed to compare notes. But when I sat in my car afterward, hands on the steering wheel, I realized something that made my stomach flip in a completely different way. I liked him, not just as a convenient piece in the puzzle of my sister's mess, not just as a character in her old story I was trying to fact-check, but as himself. The way he listened, the way he owned his own mistakes without turning them into a sob story, the way he made me feel like I was not insane for wanting more than the role I had been assigned in my family. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was him, thanking me for reaching out, saying he hoped our conversation had given me some clarity, asking me to let him know if things escalated with my sister so he could be prepared. I stared at the message for a long time, then wrote back something simple, about how it had helped more than he knew. I did not tell him yet that he had just become part of a plan I had not fully formed but could feel taking shape somewhere under my collarbone. Because here is the thing. I did not just want my sister to feel pain. I wanted her to sit in the reality that other people could choose each other without her being the center of it. I wanted her to look at someone she had treated like a disposable extra and see him choosing someone else on purpose. I wanted to break the story where she was always the main character, even when she was the villain. I know how that sounds. I can already hear the imaginary comments about how I should have just focused on healing, on letting go, and moving on. But I was not some saint floating above my own life. I was a very human woman whose sister had been stealing and smashing things that mattered to other people for years, while everyone told me to be understanding. I was done being understanding. I wanted cause and effect. So when he asked, a few days later, if I wanted to grab dinner, as actual people, not just as casualties of your sister's drama, I said yes. And I did not pretend it was just about information or closure. I let myself want the way it felt when he looked at me like I was not just the responsible older sister or the reasonable one, but someone interesting in her own right. The first time my sister noticed anything was when he posted a photo from that dinner on his profile. It was not even a couple picture. It was just a shot of our table, 2 plates, 2 glasses, my hand blurry in the corner as I tried to move out of the frame. The caption was something vague about good company and real conversation. My face was barely visible. But if you knew me, you could tell. Apparently, she knew me. She called me 6 times in a row that night. I let it go to voicemail. Then the text started. Are you serious right now? Why are you talking to him? This is crossing a line. You know how much he hurt me. It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. The irony of her suddenly caring about lines after what she had done on that couch was almost too much. I typed and erased answer after answer. The version where I told her exactly what I thought of her using him as an excuse for every monstrous thing she did. The version where I listed all the people she had hurt while crying about her trauma. The version where I told her that if anyone in this situation had earned the right to circle back to one of her exes, it was me. Not that I believed in that logic to begin with. In the end, I went with simple. You lost every right to tell me who I can talk to the second you decided my fiancé was a toy you could borrow. Do not contact my clients. Do not show up at my apartment. And do not ever again try to make your choices about something that happened years ago with someone you blocked because he was not making enough money for you at the time. It took her 4 minutes to reply. Wow, she wrote. So vindictive. My therapist was right. You have unresolved resentment. I am in a really fragile place right now, and you are doing this on purpose to hurt me. You are not just punishing me. You are punishing the part of me that still believes in love. I stared at that last line until the letters blurred. There it was again. That talent she had for turning everything into a poetic tragedy where she was the wounded heroine, not the person who had just blown up the life of the sister she claimed to love. I felt my jaw clench so hard it hurt. You are an adult, I wrote back. If love to you means sneaking around with someone your sister is living with and planning a future with, then maybe what needs to be examined is your definition of love, not my resentment. Stop texting me. I blocked her after that. Not forever, not in some dramatic ceremony, just in the quiet, practical way you block a number when you realize nothing good is going to come through it for a while. My phone felt lighter afterward. My chest did not yet, but at least there was one less channel broadcasting her version of reality at me. For a while, things existed in this strange limbo. I kept seeing him. We went for walks. We cooked together at my apartment. We talked about stupid television shows and very not stupid fears. Sometimes the ghost of my sister hovered between us and we had to push it aside deliberately. We were careful, maybe too careful, not to talk about her all the time, so our connection would not be built entirely on mutual resentment. And here is the messy truth. The more I got to know him, the less he felt like a tool in some revenge plan, and the more he felt like, well, a person I could fall for if I let myself. That scared me. It would have been so much simpler if I could have kept him in the category of symbolic consequence, someone I dated long enough to make a point and then let float away. But people are not that tidy. They have histories and flaws and annoying habits, and sometimes they also have a way of making you feel seen in a way that makes it hard to go back to being invisible. The first time my parents found out about him was courtesy of my sister. Obviously, she could not stand not being the one to control the narrative. One night, my mother showed up at my door unannounced, her lips pressed into a line so tight they were almost invisible. I knew that face. It was the one she wore when the neighbors had seen my sister screaming in the yard as a kid, and she had to explain that, "We are going through a rough patch. She is very sensitive." It was the damage control face. "We need to talk. she said, walking past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. I heard some things today that honestly made me sick. If one of those things was about your younger daughter sleeping with my fiancé while I was half dead with a fever, then great. We are finally on the same page, I said, crossing my arms. She closed her eyes for a second, like she was summoning patience from another dimension. This is not helpful, she said. I am not here to rehash that. What is done is done. You ending the engagement was your decision, and we have to accept it. But now I hear that you are seeing someone from your sister's past, someone who hurt her deeply, someone she still has not healed from. Do you have any idea how cruel that is? I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, sharp and humorless. You mean the man she blocked because he was not financially impressive enough, and then turned into a tragic figure she uses to justify acting like a tornado in other people's lives? I asked. Yes, I have met him. No, he did not do what she has been telling you he did. We have compared notes. My mother's face crumpled in a way I did not expect. For a second, she looked less like the polished woman who organized charity events, and more like someone's exhausted older sister. You do not understand, she said. Your sister, she is fragile. She has always been. She feels things so deeply. If we do not support her, she falls apart. And I do not? I asked quietly. I did not fall apart, walking in on what I walked in on. I did not feel anything then. Do you know what I did after that? I took some time, I leaned on a friend, and then I started canceling wedding venues and untangling my life from a man who thought my commitment was a suggestion. I did not ask you to pay for a therapist to tell me I am special. I did not demand spa weekends to process. I just handled it. That is exactly it, she said, sounding almost triumphant. You are strong. You always have been. You do not need the same things she does. Maybe I do, I said. Or maybe she should have been required to grow up a long time ago. Maybe everyone telling her she is too fragile for consequences is why she keeps smashing everything in reach and then crying when someone gets cut. Silence settled between us, dense and uncomfortable. My mother looked around my apartment like she was only really seeing it for the first time. The mismatched furniture, the stack of bills on the counter, the little plant on the windowsill that was somehow still alive. Please, she said finally, voice softening, for my sake, if not for hers. Do not get involved with him. It is only going to make things worse. Your sister is already at the edge. She has been talking about how she sees him on social media, how he is connected to you now, and she is not well. What if something happens? You do not want that on your conscience. There it was. Not concern for me. Concern for possible consequences if my sister could not handle being out of the center of the universe for once. I felt something inside me calcify. I am not responsible for what she does with her feelings, I said. I am responsible for my choices. And right now, I am choosing not to let her dictate my life anymore. If she cannot handle the fact that other people exist outside her narrative, then maybe what she needs is a different kind of help than you have been giving her. My mother flinched like I had slapped her. I did my best, she said. We did our best. We raised 2 daughters and we tried to give you both what you needed. You gave her a safety net and gave me a lecture about resilience, I said. That is not the same thing. She left soon after, muttering something about how I would regret this stubbornness one day. I closed the door behind her and leaned my forehead against it, taking a deep breath. My hands were shaking again, but this time there was something else under it. Relief, maybe, or something close to it. The fallout did not stop there, obviously. My father called later, his tone more measured, asking if we could sit down like adults and talk everything through. My ex started sending these long, tortured messages about how he had been confused, how my sister had manipulated him, how he still loved me and wanted to fix things. He tried to paint himself as her victim too, which might have been more convincing if I had not watched him make the specific decision to slide his hand under her shirt. Canceling the wedding was a bureaucratic mess that ate up weeks of my life. The deposits were labeled non-refundable, the venue wanted layers of documentation, and untangling the shared lease we had almost signed cost me 2 months of rent I really did not have. My friend, the same one who had picked me up from the parking lot when I was shaking and feverish, sat next to me at the table making phone calls while I sounded like I was going to fall apart halfway through every sentence. Every dollar hurt, but none of it hurt as much as the idea of staying. At some point, he stopped with the tortured essays and shifted to shorter, angrier messages about how I was throwing everything away and letting other people poison me. Then even those dried up. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he and my sister tried to make a relationship out of that disaster for a while, mostly out of stubbornness and image management. A few months later, someone mentioned he had moved out of state for work and that they had quietly stopped seeing each other long before that. Whether they are on separate continents or sitting in the same room right now, I honestly do not know, and I work very hard not to care. As far as I am concerned, he is just a blocked contact and a badly chosen almost wedding I dodged at the very last second. I ignored all of them for a while and focused on the one place where things felt like they were moving forward instead of spiraling. The connection growing between me and the man who had once been nothing more than a ghost in my sister's story. We started looking less at the past and more at what we wanted now. Not in the big, dramatic forever sense right away, just in the what are you doing Friday sense. You would think, given how everything started, that I would be constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for my sister to show up at his door or mine, tears running down her face, begging for him back. That did not happen. What she did instead was more insidious. She started contacting people around us. A client of mine mentioned casually one afternoon that he had gotten a weird message from a woman claiming to be your sister, saying she was worried about my mental state and that I was acting out of character by dating dangerous men. Another friend told me my sister had called her crying, saying I was stealing her past and trying to destroy every chance she had at happiness. She framed it like I was the bully, like I had swooped in and snatched something away from her small pile of joys. That was when I realized this was not just about the two of us anymore. She was trying to control the whole narrative in our wider circle. I was not surprised. I was angry, and I was tired. When my father called again, I answered, mostly because I needed to know how far into their heads she had crawled this time. He sounded older than I remembered, his voice rough at the edges. I have been talking to your mother, he said, and to your sister, and to some other people. I think I have not been paying attention for a long time. That is one way to put it, I said. I was in my kitchen, staring at the sink full of dishes that never seemed to empty, no matter how many times I washed them. Real life does not pause for family drama. You still have to scrub plates. He let out a breath. I heard from your cousin, he said, and from that friend of yours, the one who stopped coming around years ago. They both told me things that line up a little too neatly with what you are saying now. I am not proud of admitting this, but I think we made it too easy for your sister to avoid consequences. I think we did that because it was easier than watching her fall apart. And we expected you to carry more than we ever should have asked you to carry. Later that night, she sent me a short message that just said, "Thank you for finally making someone pay attention." We did not magically go back to being close after that. Too much had happened and too many years had passed. But at least there was one small, solid piece of acknowledgement where before there had only been silence. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from him. It did not fix anything, but it did shift something. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes for a second. So what are you going to do about it? I asked. Besides calling me to say you finally believe me after everyone else had to corroborate it. He was quiet for a moment. We are insisting she gets real help this time, he said. Not just a couple of sessions with someone who tells her she is special. We found a program, a structured one. If she wants any financial support from us going forward, she has to commit to it. Your mother is struggling with this. She feels guilty. She keeps saying she failed her. I keep saying we failed both of you. And what about me? I asked. What does support look like for me? Or do I just get the satisfaction of knowing my pain finally met the bare minimum requirement of witnesses to be considered real? He sighed. I do not know yet, he said, but I am listening now. That is not enough, I know, but it is where I am starting. It was not the grand vindication I had fantasized about in my more petty moments, the ones where everyone begged for my forgiveness while my sister sobbed in the background. It was quieter, clumsier, more human, and maybe that was better, even if it did not feel as dramatically satisfying. While my sister settled into whatever therapeutic program my parents had strong-armed her into, my life did something I had almost forgotten it could do. It kept going. I still had to show up at work. I still had to pay bills. I still had to decide what to cook for dinner, and whether I had the energy to actually cook it, or if I was going to eat cereal standing over the sink again. My relationship, if I can call it that at this point in the story, with the man my sister had once turned into a ghost, got deeper and more complicated in all the usual ways. We started sleeping over at each other's places. We started leaving toothbrushes in each other's bathrooms. We started having stupid little arguments about nothing and big conversations about everything. It stopped being about her in the day-to-day and started being about whether we wanted the same things long-term, whether we could handle each other's rough edges. Of course, it was not all clean. Nothing ever is. One night, months into this new phase, I got a message from a woman I did not know. She had mutual friends with him and had seen a picture of us together. She wanted me to know, she said, that he had not always been as straightforward as he seemed now. That back when he was struggling financially, before he got stable work, he had a habit of dating women who could support him and not always being honest with them about who else he was seeing. My stomach dropped as I read her words. I could actually hear the universe laughing like, "Oh, you thought you were done dealing with messy people just because you picked someone outside your usual circle." It would have been easy to delete the message and pretend I had never seen it. It would have been easier to assume she was exaggerating or bitter. But I had spent too much of my life watching other people ignore red flags until they turned into fires. I was not going to do that again, even if this particular fire had started way before I ever met him. When I confronted him about it, he did not deny it. He did not try to gaslight me or twist it into something else. He sat on my couch, hands clasped between his knees, and told me exactly how ugly that period of his life had been, how lost he had felt after his mother died, how desperate he had been to feel safe, how that desperation had made him do things he was ashamed of now, how he had hurt people who did not deserve it, not because he set out to, but because he was too busy trying not to drown to notice he was stepping on other people. "I am not telling you this to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I am telling you because you deserve the full picture if you are going to decide whether you want to keep doing this with me. I am not that person anymore. I have not been for a long time. But he existed. And it is not fair to you to pretend he did not. I wish I could say I handled it with perfect maturity. I did not. I cried. I shouted. I told him he was exactly the kind of person my sister liked to blame her choices on. I told him I felt stupid for letting myself be drawn to someone connected to her in any way. I told him I needed space and then actually took it, which for someone like me was a bigger step than it sounds. I did not immediately decide to forgive and forget. I sat with it, with the knowledge that the man I was building something with had once used people in ways that sounded uncomfortably familiar. Here's the difference, though, the thing that ended up mattering more than the past itself. He did not try to make it my job to fix his guilt. He did not cry and make it about how hard it was for him to be seen as that person. He said he understood if I wanted to walk away, and that he would not blame me. He did not chase me with 100 messages a day. He let me have the space I had asked for. In that space, I did something that would have horrified my younger self. I went to therapy. Real therapy for me, not as a chaperone for my sister or a translator for my parents' feelings. I sat in a small room with a woman who looked more like someone's cool aunt than a professional, and I told her everything. The couch, the ghost story, the revenge plan that had turned into something messier and more real, the way my family had turned my strength into an excuse to never check if I was actually okay. We talked about patterns, about how being the responsible one had made it easy for me to ignore my own needs until they exploded, about how watching my sister weaponize vulnerability had made me suspicious of my own, about how dating someone who had once used people did not automatically mean I was repeating my sister's choices, but that I did need to be honest with myself about what I was willing to risk for the possibility of something good. I could make this part sound neat, like I did the work, and then emerged with a perfectly calibrated sense of self-worth and a clear checklist for future relationships. That would be a lie. What really happened was this. I kept going, week after week, sometimes saying useful things and sometimes talking in circles. I messed up. I texted him on nights I had promised myself I would not. I blocked and unblocked his number twice. I learned that healing is less like climbing a staircase and more like walking in a spiral. You keep passing the same points, but a little higher each time. Eventually, we sat down again, the two of us, at my kitchen table. The same table where I had once dropped a stack of wedding brochures and sobbed. We laid out everything like we were sorting through a messy drawer, the hurt, the hope, the ugly truths, the tiny, stubborn good things that kept surviving even when the rest of it went up in flames. I am not asking you to pretend the past did not happen, he said. I am asking if you think the person I am now, the one you have actually been with, is someone you can build a life with, knowing that he still has to keep an eye on certain old instincts. And I am telling you that if the answer is no, I will survive. It will hurt, but I will not turn it into a story about how you ruined me. I am done doing that. I looked at him and thought about my sister, about how every time someone left her or she blew up something good, she turned it into a story where she was the tragic center and everyone else was a side character. I thought about how different it felt to sit across from someone who was not asking me to carry his narrative for him. I do not know what our life would look like, I said. I cannot promise you I will not freak out sometimes when something reminds me of that old version of you. I cannot promise I will be chill and cool and easy. I am not that person. But I can promise that if I stay, it is because I am choosing you, not because I am trying to prove a point to anyone else. And if you ever start acting like the man you just described again, I am gone. He nodded. That is fair, he said. That is more than fair. So I stayed. Not because I needed to win some invisible competition with my sister, not because I wanted to post pictures that would make her spiral, but because in the middle of all that chaos, I had found someone who was willing to be honest in a way I had rarely seen in my family. It was not perfect, it was sometimes exhausting, but it was real. 3 years after everything first exploded on a completely ordinary fall morning, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when that familiar wave of nausea hit me out of nowhere. It was not the bone-deep flu kind of sick this time. It was sharper, stranger, mixed with this ridiculous flutter of hope I did not want to admit to out loud. 3 pharmacy tests later, lined up on the edge of my bathroom sink, there was no denying it. I was pregnant. The irony was not lost on me. Years before, I had been planning a wedding and vaguely daydreaming about kids with a man who could not even keep his hands off my sister for one night. Now I was carrying a baby with someone who had once been nothing more than a ghost in one of her dramatic stories. Someone I had met in the smoking crater her betrayal left behind. If you had told me that timeline at the beginning, I would have laughed in your face and told you to stop watching so many shows. Telling him was one of the scariest conversations I have ever had. Not because I thought he was going to disappear, but because having a child is permanent in a way no lease or engagement ring ever will be. You can cancel venues, return dresses, rip up contracts. You cannot send a baby back because things got hard. When I finally got the words out, my voice shaking more than I wanted to admit, he went quiet for so long I thought I was going to throw up again. Then he looked at me with those tired, honest eyes and said, I am completely terrified, and I want this more than I have ever wanted anything in my life. Our son was born on a rainy spring morning, all scrunched up face and furious little fists. He had his father's eyes and my stubborn nose, and the second they put him on my chest, I understood at least part of what people mean when they talk about unconditional love. Not because every other kind of love in my life had been fake, but because this one rewired something in me on a level I did not know existed. My friend, the one who had come to drag me out of that parking lot when I could not trust my own hands on a steering wheel, was the first person besides us to hold him. She basically moved into my apartment for the first few weeks, taking night shifts on the couch, handing me snacks when I forgot to eat, and reminding me that showering was not, in fact, optional. She jokes that she is his unofficial godmother, but the truth is she became the anchor I did not even know I needed. My sister found out through my mother, because of course she did. A few days after we came home from the hospital, a package showed up at my door. An expensive baby blanket that looked like it belonged in a catalog more than in my laundry basket, with no card inside. My father came to visit and held his grandson with shaking hands, crying in a way I had never seen from him. My mother took longer to show up, still wrestling with her own guilt over what she had let slide between me and my sister for so many years. Being a mother changed the equation in ways I did not see coming. On the one hand, I suddenly had a little more empathy for how terrifying it must have been for my parents to have a child as volatile as my sister, even if I still disagreed completely with the way they handled it. On the other hand, I understood with a new kind of clarity that there are some things you simply cannot let your kid be around, no matter how many therapy sessions everyone in the room has gone to. 7 years have passed since the day I walked into that apartment and felt my life snap in two. My sister did the program. She did not magically become a different person at the end of it. She is still dramatic, still self-centered in a way that makes my teeth ache sometimes. But she is not the same either. There are moments now when she catches herself before she does something cruel. Moments when she actually apologizes without turning the apology into a performance. Moments where I can see, for a second, the girl she might have been if our parents had not turned her tears into currency. We are not close. People hate hearing that. By the way, they love a reconciliation story. They want sisters to hug it out in the third act and promise to never let anything come between them again. That is not what happened here. What we have now is something thin and fragile and strictly limited. We text on holidays. We see each other at family events. We keep conversations shallow on purpose. She knows I will leave if she crosses certain lines again. I know she is still capable of it. We live with that. My parents had to learn to live with a different version of their family, too. One where I do not show up on command to keep the peace. One where their oldest daughter has boundaries they cannot guilt her out of, no matter how many stories they tell about sacrifice and forgiveness. My mother still slips sometimes, still talks about my sister's progress like it is an accomplishment we should all applaud. My father still looks tired when I say I am not ready to have her in my home around my child. But they also bring groceries when they know work has been heavy for me. They babysit. They tell my son stories that do not erase what happened, but also do not turn his aunt into a monster. As for me, I have a life now that does not revolve entirely around what my sister did or did not do. I have a small business that pays the bills more months than it does not. I have a partner who still annoys me sometimes by leaving his socks in the living room and still surprises me by being more thoughtful than I expect on days when I am sure he has not noticed how tired I am. We fight. We make up. We go to couples therapy when things get too tangled to sort out on our own. We are not some miracle couple. We are just two flawed people choosing each other on purpose over and over again. Sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is finally quiet and my brain decides it is a great time to replay old memories, I still see that couch. I still feel the fever, the shaking, the way the world tilted. I still taste the metallic fear in my mouth. Those images do not evaporate just because time passed and other things layered over them, but they do not own me anymore. They are one scene in a much longer story I am still writing. If you are waiting for the part where I tell you I forgave everyone and now we all have dinner together once a week and laugh about the past, I am going to disappoint you. That is not real life, at least not mine. What I have instead is this: an understanding that some damage cannot be undone, only acknowledged. A commitment to not gaslight myself anymore into thinking my pain is less valid because I survived it without making a spectacle. A willingness to be the villain in someone else's version of events if that is the price of not being the background character in my own life. My sister tells people she went through a dark season and came out stronger, with the help of her loving family. She does not mention the part where that loving family finally told her no. She certainly does not talk about how the man she once turned into a tragic ghost now lives across town with me and our kid. That he is the one who picks up our son from preschool on days I am buried in deadlines. In her story, I am probably the cold older sister who could not let go of the past. I am fine with that. My ex-fiancé, wherever he ended up, is mostly just a ghost in my phone now. A blocked number and a half-remembered name my father occasionally mentions, only to assure me that no, they never got married and that whole thing burned out a long time ago. In mine, I am the woman who finally stopped holding the umbrella for everyone else and went inside. Not because the rain stopped hurting, but because I realized it was not my job to keep everyone else dry while I was shivering. Maybe that makes me selfish. Maybe it makes me human. Either way, it is the only version of the story that has ever felt like my own.